Welcome to Tangents. I'm Susan Farley, Project Manager for McLaughlin Research Corporation, and I support the Public Affairs Office at the Naval Undersea Warfare Center, Division Newport. June is Pride Month, and we're excited to bring you a special series to celebrate. Vima Manfredo is Division Newport's Special Emphasis Program Manager for LGBTQ+A, and she has taken over as host of Tangents. She's assembled a wonderful lineup of guests, and there have been some great, thought-provoking conversations detailing the struggles and the goals of the LGBTQ community. In this episode, Vima talks with friend and NUWC colleague Pete Rogers about his love of flying, growing up in a deeply religious family, and his experience in the military. Pete works in our Human Resources Department, and he shares some pretty great advice in this episode. If anyone had a chance to attend a Pride Month commemoration in Chafee Auditorium a few years ago, you got to hear from a photojournalist who captured some great images of servicemen and women, Pete included. And also, Pete talks about his pals Morgan Freeman and Michelle Obama. Have a listen.
Welcome back, everyone, to Tangents, the podcast for NUWC Division Newport and NUWC in general. I am not Susan, as you've noticed. I've taken over the podcast, although Susan's here too.
Hi, everyone.
So today we have a very special guest, our very own Pete Rogers. Hi, Pete.
Hello. Hey, Vima. Hi, Susan.
Hi.
So Pete, let's start with introducing yourself to our listeners. Just let us know who you are and what you do.
Sure. Yeah. So I'm Pete Rogers, and I am currently a CEPM on the EEO CEPM team. I'm the American Indian CEPM currently. Previously, I held Vima's role as the LGBTQ CEPM, the very first one that NUWC had. That was quite an honor. And I'm currently in Code 1012, Recruiting and Staffing Specialist for HR. So that's where I'm currently working.
And you do a fantastic job. I did steal your job for the CEPM, but you just moved over to be a CEPM for another great community. And you've done such a great job on both of those. But I wanted to bring your story, basically your life story to our listeners. So let's start from the very beginning. Tell us a little bit about your family and your coming out story.
Sure. Yeah. So I grew up in a very Southern fire and brimstone, religious, conservative military family. So a Marine Corps father, colonel, and a mom that was very high up in the kind of the Southern Baptist church scene down in the South. I knew I was gay probably around age 12, somewhere between 12 and 13. That's when I kind of acknowledged it myself, but didn't really come out to anyone of my friends until closer to age 16. And my family was, where I came out to them was actually shortly after that. But going back before all that, probably around 8 to 9 years of age, I already knew that I was basically condemned to hell and faced disownment from my family and the church that my family had me belong to. Just to give you perspective, I mean, my family was so ingrained into the church scene that my family not only went to church on Sundays, but 3 days a week we had what we called family church, which we would gather just as a family and do more Bible study and stuff like that. But unbeknownst to me, at the time, my parents suspected that I was gay. And instead of having the vocabulary to talk to me about it, they actually used the Bible to condemn me for it and to kind of put the fear in me and to keep me from ever saying it or acting on it. Eventually, that came to fruition, and I was eventually on my own at age 14, living out of a small hangar in an airport just outside Washington, D.C. And I had this love of flying that I don't know where it came from, but flying was my passion. And in some sense, it was like the opposite of the fear that I had and the guilt I had for being gay. And flying made me feel like I was in control of my life, and the rest of it was seemingly out of control for such a young kid. But at the airport, I would wash planes and mow grass and pump gas in exchange for flight time, and that was my passion. So instead of really focusing on myself internally, outwardly, I was just focusing on flying. I eventually joined an organization called the Civil Air Patrol, which is a cadet organization, quasi-military, supported by the Air Force. And that organization organization kind of kept me on a path towards the military. And the old dogs at the airport, as they call them, which are like all retired military retirees that were all pilots just hanging out at the airport. And the old dogs kind of took me under their wing, mentored me and coached me in aviation. And I ended up becoming Cadet of the Year in the Civil Air Patrol. And I was rewarded an F-15 incentive flight out of Langley Air Force Base. It was August 29th, 1991, but who's keeping track? And honestly, the reason why I brought that up is because that's when, as a young teenager, that's when I felt like I was on top of the world, like literally. In the F-15, we went down the runway, the fighter jet, sucked up the landing gear, went pure vertical, climbed to 56,000 feet, to the point where I could actually see the curvature of the Earth and a couple stars. So I was on the edge of space. And that was the first time in my entire life that I felt confident that I was going to be okay as a gay kid, and that I would get through it somehow.
Wow. You saw the edge of the world, and that is amazing. So one of the messages that I try to bring as the second SEPOM is bringing an understanding that a lot of people from the LGBT community have a chosen family, and sometimes this family comes from work environments because we don't have that family support at home. So how did your chosen family and this organization help you throughout the years?
Well, I think the short of that, Vima, is that my friends are my family and have been for many years. You know, we call them surrogate families in some circles, but I think it's very common among, gay kids that are not able to turn to their own family for support or, the things that families would normally provide. So, we find it other places. So my friends became my family, and I mentioned before the old dogs, as I call them at the airport. They never asked me, why I couldn't go home and why I spent so much time there, rather. But I think they knew. And the unspoken part about the gay stuff was not as important because they accepted me through leadership. Like, for example, there's a guy that was stationed at the Pentagon as a colonel. His name is David McLeod, and he became like a surrogate father to me. He and his wife were just amazing. But he was not on flight status, even though he's a fighter pilot, because he was stationed at the Pentagon. And he went out to the local airport where I was pretty much living, and he ended up taking me under his wing and becoming my primary flight instructor. That carried with me all the way through to him, and the old dogs helping writing letters, helping me fill out applications to college and making calls and stuff. So I did develop a support network. And Dave McLeod, God rest his soul, ended up a 3-star general in the Air Force as the Alaskan Air Command commander out in Anchorage, Alaska. And he unfortunately died in a plane crash out there while currently serving as a 3-star. That was one of the biggest blows in my life, the greatest mentor I ever had, and the one adult that I looked up to the most I had lost. But nonetheless, what he left behind for me was the legacy of me knowing what family felt like. And that turned into a home of openness and honesty over the years, and seeking that out. So I turned out pretty good because I do have a sense of home because of people like him.
And I wanted to talk a little bit more about your personal achievements. You mentioned that you're a pilot. What else have you done?
Well, I mentioned the military thing, and I think that maybe folks might not understand the relationship between being gay and my history with the military. When you grow up in a military family, that's what you know. And for me, joining the military was like a no-brainer. Military family, it would pay for my college. It would get me away so I could try to figure myself out and where I fit in the world. And so I joined the military, the Air National Guard, and at the same time I was putting myself through the process of getting into college. And I went to Daniel Webster College, which is an aviation program up in Nashua, New Hampshire. And the old dogs at the airport, they gave me so much flight time. But by the time I showed up at college, I actually had more flight time than the instructors had. So I was pretty much teaching them and breezed through college.
Nice.
But from there, from college, I graduated and I worked for Cape Air and Island Air, which are small regional airlines in the Cape and Boston area. And I worked my way into becoming like the operations manager and director of HR. And at the same time, paralleling my role in the military in the Air National Guard as an 3 decades ago, actually.
Wow.
And that's a funny story. I'll tell it real briefly. So in Provincetown, there's this thing called Tea Dance, which is like a gathering between like 3 o'clock and 6 o'clock for anybody and everybody, all walks of life, to come and just it's an outdoor venue with music and cocktails and people laughing and having fun at the light of the day. It's a nice time. But it lets out at 6 o'clock, and all like roughly 1,200 people in shorts and t-shirts and shirtless guys and stuff letting out onto the main street all at once. I'm walking with a friend of mine as we're just leaving, and I look over and I see David, not knowing him at the time, and he's reading this book that's like super thick. I mean, like he's just sitting on the steps and he's not looking at anybody, not checking anybody out. And long story short, as I whacked my friend on the shoulder that I was there with, and I said, that is what you call husband material. He is not interested in looking at anybody. He's just deep in the book. So after taking him flying on our first date, we've been together. And David and I are like the yin and yang. It's kind of funny being with it. We are definitely polar opposites, but we complement each other. He's the introvert. I'm definitely the extrovert. I'm like the meat and potatoes guy with dessert, and he's like kale, quinoa, and CrossFit. And, we've been together for, like I said, like 26 years. His family is accepting, unlike my side, obviously. But David is accomplished. He's a published author. He's an HR professional. We used to flip houses together, and to this day we have 2 dogs named Wiki and Hobbs, and we love boating and flying. Now, I still fly, but although I'm a disabled veteran, I require a safety pilot to go with me, but we still go with friends, and I get up there as much as I can.
You guys are living the dream.
I know. I think you just charmed David with your flying abilities, because that's quite a pickup line.
That's pretty cool.
I have to admit, doing that on the first date was kind of
That's a big flex, Pete.
That's funny.
Yeah, but you forgot to brag about a couple of things. Not all of our listeners know that you are our celebrity, because you've met quite a few high-brass people.
I take it you're talking about Michelle Obama.
I am.
So for anybody that wants to swing by my office in HR, you can see some pictures of Michelle Obama and I and Morgan Freeman. So when I was an air traffic controller on Martha's Vineyard, I was the controller in charge, and if you recall, the Obamas actually vacationed out there for all 8 years of their the presidency. I can't go into detail about how the connection happened, but because it has to do with some security issues and how what role I played in getting closer to them. But because I had escort authority in my position, I was asked to kind of hang out with Morgan Freeman for a couple hours, and it turns out he's a pilot like I am, and he loves jazz music like I do, and we really hit it off. And then because Morgan was there visiting the Obamas, there was a connection to Michelle, and we got close. So even to this day, we're kind of considered a friend. So it's a badge of honor for me. I absolutely love to be able to say that. And Morgan Freeman actually, it's gone now, but he actually did the voice for my caller ID not caller ID, but my voice message when people would call my phone and I didn't answer. It'd be Morgan Freeman saying, "You've reached Pete Rogers' phone."
Oh my goodness.
That's dope.
Kind of cool. People would call me and say, "Just don't pick up. I'm going to call you back. I wanted to hear it."
Nice.
So, yeah. So it's kind of cool.
That's really cool. Let's dig a little deeper on your military service.
Sure.
You've been in the military for 22 years before you retired, which means you served under Donna Santel. Can you give us a little bit of a picture on how it was to serve under this ban on gay service?
Yeah, sure. This is one of my biggest things about my past is that I think that acceptance can be found in and for gay people or anybody that's yearning to be accepted and find equality, can be found through good leadership. I found that in the military, survival for me, not being able to say who I was or risk being kicked out just by asking the wrong person if they're okay with it. But I found that if I did a good job and I added value to the team and the mission, then I found myself being accepted for the most part. And, even when it was fairly obvious that my my commanding officer or coworkers in the military, knew that I was gay, as long as I had their back, was doing a good job, and that whoever the leadership was above me, it was like an unspoken agreement. You do good, and we'll ignore all that. I think that for me, understanding why people see things differently is the key to seeing things more clearly. We've got to understand and walk in other people's shoes to understand where we need to begin to actually get to a better place together. Yeah, for Don't Ask, Don't Tell. So when I first went into the military, that was 3 years before Don't Ask, Don't Tell was instituted. And so for folks that don't know that type of history, what the military was like before Don't Ask, Don't Tell, over 20 years ago, if you were found out for being gay, you could actually be put in jail for 3 years with almost no due process under the Uniform Code of Military Justice. So I was really nervous, but because I didn't have a support network and I needed the military to get through school and to serve my country, I was really risking a lot by joining the military before Don't Ask, Don't Tell. But, over the 19 years of Don't Ask, Don't Tell, it was a good thing up front, and then by the time it was ended 20 years later, it just felt like it was long overdue for being repealed. I think that, for example, in my career in the military, it was oftentimes it was the things that weren't said or were done behind the scenes. For example, just recently, now here we are, 25, almost 30 years later, I had a former commander just recently, within the last year, approach me and apologize because he lives kind of up the road from me, and the neighbors were all friends and everything, but he came clean, and he said that I was passed over for a promotion, and I was kind of marginalized because they knew I was gay. So there was proof positive right there. And I know, Vima, we talked about this, whether I should mention this or not, but, there's been other things, while serving. I was physically and sexually assaulted by 2 heavily intoxicated service members at one point, which left me in the hospital, in a civilian hospital off base. And I had to let it go in order to continue in my career as if it never happened. And subsequently from that, I definitely began drinking as a measure to self-medicate. So I eventually, the good news is I eventually discovered therapy and gave up drinking as a source of not dealing with what I'd been through. And so, by sharing that, it's important because, if people don't hear or get a chance to understand the cause and effect of these things and how deep it goes for some folks, and how are we ever going to get to a better place, in my mind. The light at the end of the tunnel, or the silver lining, is that when Don't Ask, Don't Tell was repealed, Anderson Cooper, with the help of Jeff Chang, who wrote a book on Don't Ask, Don't Tell, had me on CNN, which is really cool. I began to realize kind of what living an open life and marinating in acceptance really felt like. It was like a huge weight had been lifted when Don't Ask, Don't Tell was repealed, and I had no more fear about being found out or fear of homophobic investigators doing my periodic background check. If you think about it, there's the power that they held over my continued service. Just one homophobic investigator behind the scenes could find a way, knowing that I'm gay, through the background check, to discontinue service or make it an issue or a red flag. And that power over me was just, it was not a good feeling. But when Don't Ask, Don't Tell was repealed, it really was a new lease on life and my career.
Yeah, and Pete, thank you so much for sharing your story. I really appreciate it that you open up and let others hear your story from your own point of view. And also, I am so proud of you that you are now sober. You're over a year sober.
Yeah, it's almost it'll be 2 years next month.
And that's such a great achievement. I'm super proud of you.
Congratulations.
Yeah. And Vima, just since we're talking about it, I worked with my leadership team, and they were supportive. And I know that if there's anybody else out there that's struggling and self-medicating like I was, there is a way. You're not necessarily going to lose your career, and you're not going to lose your clearance if you do it the right way. And so I'm living proof of that. So there's ways to get help, both through therapy and through any measures necessary to get to a better place and on more solid ground. So I'm proud of Newark for handling it the way they did. I really am.
Yeah, and for others out there, we'll say it in the introduction, or you'll hear it in the introduction, but we'll let you know the number that you can call if you need help or assistance, or you're looking for therapy. So even though people are hearing it after you say it, but this is a note for ourselves to do it since we do it in the opposite order. But
there's only so much, and it certainly is dependent upon a person's wantingness or willingness. But I'm also available to talk to and help get a person to those resources to whatever degree I can.
One of the things I find here at NUWC is one thing to help people do something to help themselves is when they hear a success story like Pete's.
Yeah.
So if they hear your story, that's going to make a big impact to help people move forward with what's going on in their lives.
I appreciate that.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So to continue with your life story, you mentioned at the beginning of our call that you were the first LGBT SEPM at Newport. So how did that go, forming that position and being the very first one?
I think that, I don't know, are you asking like what my proudest achievement is as the first LGBT SEPM, or?
Oh yeah, your proudest achievement. What do you hope for our employees? What was your most challenging portion of being the very first LGBT SEPM?
Well, I think the challenge up front was just, getting it off the ground. I think that, the EDO office should be lifted up for taking initiative to do it, because it wasn't federally, and still isn't federally mandated to have that position. So folks like Matt Souza and Michelle Eddy, really trailblazed in getting approval on the position. But I still think once we established it, it was, created as we go. But I think that getting it off the ground was challenging. But I think that when I handed it off to you, Vima, I think you really took it and flew with it. So you're the one that deserves the credit for really making it into something more polished and successful. But my favorite, there's two things that actually jump into my head. There's two parts of this that I absolutely marvel and love, which is the having Jeff Shane come and speak at NUWC. I mentioned Jeff earlier. He wrote a book about Don't Ask, Don't Tell. He's a photographer. He's kind of the top of the tier person to go to for Don't Ask, Don't Tell, and how it affected and how he documented the history of that whole thing. But to have him fly from California to come out and speak at NUWC 2 years ago was just, I looked up to him so much, and to have him speaking at NUWC and to have NUWC support him coming out to talk to us was pretty much my highlight. But I think that also the other thing was getting the employee organization off the ground with you, Vima. And you did, not only did you start the LGBTQ employee organization, but I was there in my capacity as the LGBT SEPM alongside supporting you. But you really got that organization stood up, and then you jumped over and took over the LGBT SEPM role. So if there's anyone that I am proud of, and it's working with you and watching you. I'm in awe of you and the work you've done. So keep going with that, please.
Yay, Vima.
You're making me blush. This was supposed to be about you. But yeah, I agree. The talk that Jeff had here in 2019 was amazing. It was very eye-opening and very heart-wrenching. If anyone wants to see it, it is on the wiki page for the SEPMs. And if you can't find the link, just send me a message on Fusion and I'll send you the link directly. Because we did record it and we have it available for posterity. We couldn't let that one go. So do you have any advice or hope for the next generation of LGBTQ employees at NUWC and at NUWC?
I think that the goal is to get to the point where equality is part of the fabric of our culture, which is like the norm. And I hope so much so that we don't have to single out and lift up us any more than we would heterosexual Pride Month. I might take a little flack for saying that, but it's just one of those things where the success is the end of having to do this. So much so that it's ingrained that we know we're equal, that we feel equal, worst aspects of bias in today's workforce. But I want us to do it with dignity and respect. I don't want to lose our audience in the process of trying to get, all these things that happen behind the scenes. In today's federal service, if you blatantly, openly, were biased and demonstrated it somehow towards the LGBT community, I just don't see how you can get away with it nowadays. So all of that formerly outward stuff is now submerged, and it's what isn't said and what doesn't happen that hurts, and still takes place to a degree. Kind of like I mentioned earlier with the my commander telling me that my career was being messed with because of people's bias towards me for being gay.
Yeah, and you're absolutely right. That's where we want to get to, where it doesn't actually matter that you are part of the LGBT community, because we are treated equal and we are all on the same playing field, but really and truly on the same playing field. And we still have a lot of work to do to get there, working on our workplace culture, working on implicit and explicit bias. And that's what the SEPAM office is there for, to start working on that, to start identifying those barriers and moving towards a place where we are all truly equal on the same level.
I could not agree more. That's very well said. Absolutely.
So since this is Pride Month, or this will be published in Pride Month, one of the questions that I've been asking everyone is, what does Pride Month mean to you?
Well, I've been through a lot of physical and psychological abuse. We've talked about that earlier, over who I am and who I love. So I guess Pride for me is a celebration of progress and healing away from all of that ugly awful. I hope that the younger generations are living more, healthy, and more integrated, and have more of an open life, courtesy of those who paved the way, by the way. I hope they see Pride not as a party, but I hope they really understand the history of why it needs to be celebrated until the day that it doesn't need to be celebrated. Kind of what we just talked about. The day we don't have to celebrate it is kind of the ultimate celebration in and of itself. I think we have a long way to go until that day, but we are making progress.
Yeah, absolutely. And what do you hope the NUWC workforce takes away from Pride Month celebrations and everything that we're doing this month?
I said before, at the core of good leadership is acceptance. I don't think we can be one team unless we understand and embrace our differences. As a young 18-year-old joining the military, I deeply yearned for my family, my military, my government, and my social network to accept me. So I take a lot of pride in where we are regarding pride, and how leadership here at Newark in particular, has really gone all in on supporting us and our pride efforts. But I said it before in another way, the challenge is to get pride beyond a month of displays, get speakers, podcasts, and posters and all that stuff. But to get that sense of pride uplifted into how we genuinely respect each other and authentically support each other, more than just once a month, but make it every day and make it, in what we do in accomplishing the mission.
That's a great point. And that's my hope as well. So I don't have anything else to add. But Susan, do you have any?
I just was wondering, like a lot of people with stories like this, it's both happy and sad. It's a mix of everything, like life. But I just keep wondering, did you ever reconcile with your family?
No, not not really.
No. Okay.
I just, it's kind of a heartbreaking story, because I've always left the door open. Through a lot of therapy and a lot of time, I pride myself on being a compassionate, understanding person. In fact, my favorite word is reverence. And to have reverence for somebody, it's just like I said it before, it's kind of the first step is beginning to understand folks. And I've tried to understand my family, and I just can't get in. just no way. My mom died of cancer at 65, and she denounced me on her deathbed and would not even let me go say goodbye, even though I had not seen her for a long time. And to this day, there's no acknowledgement of my marriage, of who I am in that sense. If I denounced myself and said I wasn't gay, then I'm sure they would take me in with open arms, but that's not happening. That's never going to happen. So, but the door's been open for them to come and understand me and find them a common ground. And certainly, I would make it as comfortable and as respectful as I could. But I've got to live my life. And
In the meantime, you've built a great life for yourself.
Yeah, we've done good. I mean, who else can say at age 18 they broke the sound barrier and ended up
not too many people
and becoming friends with Morgan Freeman and all that stuff? If I died today, I'd be content. I'd be okay.
I feel like you have a lot more left to do.
Well, I hope so. And speaking of a lot more left to do, Vima,
Yes.
I really, honestly, I don't think anybody can fill your shoes. So I would highly encourage you to apply again for the LGBT SEPM role. I really want to see you continue that and take us to the next step that we kind of talked about earlier. That would be my one great hope for Pride this year, is to see you take this even further. So please consider that, would you? Please.
No pressure, Vima.
No pressure.
No pressure.
I am so glad that this is a podcast and not a video, because I am blushing. But thank you so much, Pete. I appreciate it so much. And I couldn't be here where I am, and I couldn't be so outspoken, so unapologetically out if it wasn't for you and the example that you set for myself and a lot of people that have interacted directly with you back in your SEPM days and since we met each other, which apparently it's only been 3 years, and I can't believe that.
I feel like I've known you forever.
I know.
That's one of the biggest qualities I look for in people is people that are old souls, and you definitely fit that bill. And Susan, I can kind of tell it's there for you too, even though I just met you. Pretty good judge of character. So.
Thank you.
But Vima, you are definitely an old soul, and I hope to know you for the rest of my life. So you've been an inspiration to me.
Oh, Pete. We're going to have to end the podcast here because I am blushing. But for real, this has been a pleasure recording with you, and it's been a pleasure interviewing you. For all our listeners, this is part of our Pride celebrations, but keep Pride in your minds 365, 24/7, because your neighbor, your brother, your sister, your cousin, what have you, is part of this community. And if you are not part of the community, you can be part of it by being an ally and standing up next to us and helping us break those barriers and living our life authentically and loving unapologetically and having a wonderful, successful career and personal life.
Well said.
So thank you so much, Pete.
Thank you, Vima. Happy Pride.
Happy Pride.
Take care, Susan.
Take care. Thank you. Thanks for listening to this special episode of Tangents. You can find this episode and the other Pride Month episodes on the Tangents Wiki, and follow us on Fusion #Tangents.